Story 1. I was told I should have managed my time off better. My mom was found dead in her apartment. The coroner couldn't even estimate the day she died. I had to clean her apartment, attend court hearings on her behalf, and was relentlessly harassed by another family that believed she had any kind of money. I even had to go to the police. I took 4 days off. I needed to leave work about 2 hours early to pick up her ashes and was faced with that. I started at a different company the next day. I went in to have lunch with my coworkers, clean out my things, and then just left. Management or human resources never bothered to contact me. They knew. Story 2. After years without raises due to budget constraints, I learned that a newly hired coworker was making approximately 30% more than I was. It didn't help that he was not very good at his job. Story 3. A panic attack while driving home. I hope to never have that experience of being unable to breathe again. Story 4. I worked in a factory a few years ago. The pay was decent, but the operator of the indoor crane was an alcoholic. He nearly harmed me with the hook. A colleague who witnessed it expressed disbelief that I wasn't injured. The operator wasn't even reprimanded. Just 2 days later, I got a job at another factory a few miles away. They were aware of the poor reputation of my previous workplace, as they had already hired for people from there before me. Story 5. The boss said, "We expect you to go above and beyond without extra pay, extra respect, or even extra coffee." I went above and beyond straight out the door. Story 6. I was the manager at a hobby store back in 2001. The owner had chased everyone else off. I was performing all the manager duties at the pay of a regular store associate. One day, I came in and one of our regular customers was behind the counter. I asked him what was going on, and he said he was the new manager. I went along with it for a few months. Turned out the guy was untrustworthy. He tried to lock me in the bathroom to make me clean it. The next day, when the owner was there taking orders, I threw my key at him, told him to leave me alone, and left. I walked to the other end of the strip mall and was promptly hired at mailboxes, etc. Story 7. My mother passed away. They refused to give me time off because my mother was not having a service. I provided the obituary and gave them the name of the contact at the funeral home. I just couldn't work with them any longer. Story 8. In college, I worked at a grocery store, either mid-shifts or closing shifts, which ended at midnight. One morning after I closed, the store manager called me from 6 to 7 a.m., asking where I was and threatening to write me up if I didn't come in. I had never opened the store and had worked until midnight the night before. I didn't appreciate her threats. I walked into the store in my pajamas, found her, and handed her my keys. Story 9. My last job was as a warehouse manager, installer, and delivery person for heavy arcade equipment for over 3 years. The company had a high turnover rate, but my boss was cool. Later, I discovered the reason for the high turnover rate. The company owner was difficult to work with. The day I quit, I was experiencing severe depression, but I still showed up to work because I enjoyed the tasks. I arrived at 6:50 a.m., with clock-in at 7 a.m. After using the bathroom, I came out and found the owner waiting for me. There was no greeting, just a comment about the clock-in time. I looked at the clock and saw it was 6:58 a.m. I managed to say good morning and walked to punch in, ignoring his remark. I started my workday and looked at the task list for the day. It was packed from start to finish. About 30 minutes into the shift, I lost all motivation. Depression can be overwhelming. My mind raced with everything I needed to do. My heart started pounding, I was short of breath, and I felt nauseous. I called my boss to explain the situation and asked if I could go home. He agreed and wished me a good day, encouraging me to call if I wanted to talk. I didn't even pack my personal tools. I just clocked out, got in my truck, and started crying, feeling completely on edge. I sat there for about 20 minutes. The owner came out with an angry expression, asking why I wasn't working. I told him I was having a bad morning and needed to leave, confirming I had received permission from my boss. The owner insisted that since I had clocked in, I had to finish my shift. I am usually a calm and relaxed person at work, but I lost it when he said that. I got out of the truck and exclaimed that I didn't have to do anything. I stated that if I said I was having a bad morning, I meant it, and that I was there because I chose to be there. I reminded him that I wasn't compensated nearly enough for the responsibilities I held. He stared at me in shock. Before he could respond, I blurted out that if I couldn't leave, then I quit, plain and simple. I told him to find someone else who could do my job without complaints. I got back in my truck and drove away, skipping a week and a half of work without leaving the house. Then my boss called to check on me. He mentioned that he saw what happened on the camera in front of the building and apologized on behalf of the owner. He asked me to return. I agreed to come back only if I received a raise and a helper. He confirmed we could discuss it. When I showed up the next day, everything seemed fine until the owner arrived. He claimed it was extremely disrespectful how I spoke to him. I looked at my boss and said I was good and decided to look for another job. 3 days later, I found a position at a company across the street, offering almost double my previous salary without the responsibilities or problems. I'm still friends with my boss. The last time we spoke, he mentioned they had to hire 3 people to do what I was doing. All the owner had to do was agree to my requests and show some respect. He would have saved a lot more money than hiring 3 people. This was the first time in my life I experienced angry depression, coupled with a panic attack that transformed into intense frustration. Story 10. I haven't quit yet, but I am working 60 hours a week and only getting paid for 40 in public accounting. Story 11. I was placed on a performance improvement plan for raising a safety and risk concern. The company failed a year later. Story 12. I encountered an IT issue that disrupted email service. I was the substitute IT person, as the regular IT staff member was away and unreachable at that time. My boss pressured me for hours until the problem was resolved. It was a situation that should not have occurred, but we were using outdated versions of the antivirus software in Microsoft Exchange, which led to the issue. For those curious, the antivirus caused the mail store to become unavailable. We were among the leading sellers of both products. Updated versions would have come at no cost to us. A week later, I was summoned to the owner's office, where he criticized me for my declining sales figures for the month, despite also handling IT responsibilities. I anticipated his direction, so I highlighted all the shortcomings within the company and demonstrated how they traced back to his lack of leadership. He foolishly left his office door open, allowing everyone to hear what I said. I then clearly expressed my thoughts on his job. I spoke to the payroll administrator on my way out and ensured I received every cent I was entitled to by the close of business that day. The situation cost the company a $15,000 deal in software sales. The IT staff member resigned the next day in solidarity, and 2 other salespeople also left. Story 13. When they let go of the cleaning staff and expected us to clean the bathrooms, it was halfway through 2020. It was bad enough to clean a bathroom, but during a pandemic? No way. Story 14. We conducted internal employee satisfaction surveys, and our department consistently ranked among the highest in the company. When the new director arrived, he negatively impacted morale, which was reflected in the next survey results. He reacted harshly and placed blame on his managers. He believed he was untouchable due to his behavior, but we confronted him about it. I left shortly thereafter. On my last day, he entered the office at 5:10 p.m. while I was tidying up and preparing to leave. He instructed me to wait because he needed to conduct my exit interview. It lasted about 10 minutes before devolving into a heated argument filled with expletives. It was quite something to experience. Story 15. I was moved from a cubicle to a table because I was a contractor and the cubicles were reserved for full-time employees. During COVID, most full-time employees were working remotely. Story 16. When I received a write-up because the manager decided to throw me under the bus for manipulating our inventory to cover the upcoming audit, I was devastated. This occurred just a day after I found out my dad had cancer. I confronted him and walked out. Story 17. My employer, a dentist, was committing insurance fraud, and I wanted no part of it. So at lunchtime, I walked out. Story 18. I worked as an independent contractor for 5 years with the same company. I handled multiple clients simultaneously and was the longest tenured employee my boss had. There had never been an issue. I had never considered leaving the position as it allowed me to work from home, gave me more control over my schedule, and paid decently. Fast forward to September of last year, my biggest client, which accounted for roughly a third of my income, decided to choose a different contractor due to a spelling error on an internal memo, despite knowing that I have dyslexia. As an independent contractor, I have no protections. I assumed things would be difficult for a month, that I would have to budget carefully, but my supervisor claimed she had a backlog of clients to assign to someone. It never happened. Instead, I was told that she couldn't trust me to do my job, that perhaps the way her company operates is not suitable for me, and various other comments that made no sense. This is a virtual assistant company, and I have been an executive assistant for more than a decade. Something I excel at. After that meeting, I started looking elsewhere. It took me until February of this year, but I'm now in a job that I absolutely love and thrive in, even though I am no longer working from home. I definitely made the right decision because my former supervisor attempted to manipulate me into staying when I gave her 1 week's notice. My contract, which I signed 5 years prior and included a rollover clause, required a mandatory 1-week notice. Those who signed on in the past year had a mandatory 2-week notice with a recommendation of 30 days. Needless to say, I informed her that her lack of planning was not my problem and that perhaps she should reconsider punishing her hardest workers by threatening their livelihood. Story 19. I had a manager once who would agree to things but never wanted it in writing. He just shrugged it off as he was an informal guy. He said I could leave early on Tuesdays and finish my shift from home so my wife could go to work and I could be home for the bus. It was fine until he decided it wasn't and threw me under the bus for working under an arrangement he never approved. I learned a lot about covering myself from working for that person. Story 20. I am a French-trained chef with a degree in restaurant management and have been cooking for 16 years. I had a shift lead who was notorious for undercooking everything and sending out raw beef and chicken. He told me, "Just shut up and do what I tell you or I'm sending you home." I looked him in the eyes, took off my apron, told him I quit, and went home. He made people sick with his food and insisted that the chili was still fine after being out of temperature for an hour. Story 21. When I was asked to do the job of 2 people, I tried for several months, but I was still being told that I wasn't getting enough work done. Goodbye. Story 22. I was asked to shovel snow around our large building while I was the only one in my department, even though there were many other people in different departments. I fell behind on my work, and no one was available to help me catch up while I wasted an hour doing that. No, thank you. Story 23. I spent a year reorganizing the workflow, resulting in a 9% profit increase without raising revenue. This simply meant less waste. Then a new manager came in, looked around and said, "I've never seen a place run like this. Let me fix it," and insisted on reverting everything to the previous state. Story 24. They were constantly calling me while I was on vacation at Disney about something that could have easily waited. I resigned within a month of returning from vacation. Story 25. I exceeded my goals but received a lower bonus because my sales peers did not perform well, not my actual team or myself. I am already working extra hours, often between 10 to 16 each day, carrying the weight of underperformance from others. Story 26. I was forced to move and discovered that in the state I was relocating to, people earned a percentage more. I obtained the HR document that explicitly outlined the compensation. I had to advocate for a raise. While playing Dungeons and Dragons with a recent college graduate in the same field, I realized he was earning literally double my salary. I found a much better paying job shortly after. Story 27. I haven't quit yet, but I recently had my breaking point. My manager, who knows about my hobbies and that I engage in them to cope with work-related stress, indicated that I'm spending too much time on what I enjoy and not enough energy at work. To clarify, my job consumes most of my energy and leaves me mentally and emotionally exhausted at the end of the day. I engage in physical activities after work, during my evenings and weekends, to cope and reduce my stress levels. It has never once interfered with my job. In fact, it has made it easier to handle. This comment comes after I performed well during one of the hardest years of my life, thanks to having an outlet. I'm done. I am already sending out resumes. Story 28. I worked at a gas station, and someone made a mess from the entrance of the store all the way to the bathroom, then continued in the bathroom. I was getting paid $10 an hour, which was not enough for that situation. Story 29. They deceived me for 3 years about qualifying for a student loan forgiveness program. When they refused to sign the paper they promised they could and would, I applied for the job I have now. Story 30. They wouldn't promote me. My boss had quit, and I was already doing all the work, just as I had for the 10 months before they hired the boss who quit, so I received the promotion elsewhere. They had the audacity to tell me that I was just about to get the promotion if I was willing to stay. I told them I would think about it just to keep them hopeful, but I was already out the door. Story 31. I was the only new person on the assembly line, putting together pieces of sound systems. I was step 1 in the process. Everyone was dead silent. And until breaks, the only voices I heard were people passing the tested pieces back to me, saying, "You messed up." For 10 hours a day, I repeatedly heard, "You messed up," or some variation of that phrase. Every day, all I would hear for over a month was this, and it eroded my mental health. If there had been any other chatter on the line, I think I would have been fine, even if it didn't involve me. But there wasn't. It didn't help that the supervisor was somewhat suspicious, and we sometimes had mandatory overtime that we wouldn't know about until near the end of the week, which made planning for weekend activities difficult. Story 32. The way everyone had very specific and quirky responses in unison when the 2 managers giving speeches said certain things made it seem like a toxic positivity culture. Story 33. We had a managers' meeting, and my general manager decided to make fun of me in front of everyone. I cried in my car afterward and quit the next day. Story 34. Safety from violent teenagers who were sent to that school as a last resort due to their behavior at other schools. I felt physically unsafe after just one day. Story 35. Being told there was no money for a pay rise for the 3rd year, and then the owner arriving and boasting about his new Porsche, which he bought the same day, while I was barely making ends meet. Story 36. I worked 6 days a week as a 32-hour salaried employee. I was asked to fill in for the manager who left without a pay raise. After complaining to the highest levels, I was told that until I worked 120 hours a week, no help would be provided. That's what it means to be a manager at this large healthcare organization. I found a new job and resigned within a month. Story 37. When I was the only one who stayed in, working during everyone else's smoke break, the manager would go with them, telling me what needed to be done while they were on break. Story 38. I didn't quit. I happily accepted the layoff since I had effectively disengaged months ago. I found a solution and utilized it. Story 39. I made a mistake that was easy to fix. A coworker reported this to the duty manager, who publicly humiliated me in front of all my colleagues, and then had the nerve to say that I would fail my university studies based on my approach to my job. I was very upset about how the situation was handled, and I was close to quitting. Even now, nearly a decade later, it makes me angry to think about how I was treated. I never went back to that place after that shift. There were many issues with that environment, but that incident sealed my decision. Fortunately, it was only meant to be a temporary position anyway, and I returned to university just a few days later. If I have a bad day at my current job, I always remind myself that my current working environment is so much better. Story 40. The year was 1999 to 2000, and I was 20 years old. I was part of a crew of about 8 to 10 people installing underground fiber optic lines primarily around the Denver metro area. We typically worked 3 weeks on and 1 week off. Since most of us lived in a different city, we received hotel accommodations and a daily allowance of $30. I was dating the boss's daughter at the time, which he had no issue with initially because I had grown up as a member of the same church. I was also a crew lead with an impeccable attendance and performance record. However, he caught wind of the fact that my coworkers and I were spending significant amounts of money on alcohol, marijuana, and various recreational drugs in our spare time. He apparently was not pleased with that because he reduced our daily allowance to the minimum of $15, And instead of receiving a full paycheck up front for the week, we got a daily allowance. Understandable, I guess, but then he did something totally underhanded. Without warning one day, he hired someone new and invited me to drive around with him scouting out the new job locations for the upcoming week. I had no idea who this person was. Instead of scouting for jobs, we scouted for used truck lots. After 5 hours of truck shopping and flattery from the new guy, who openly discussed his new salary, which was higher than mine, and his new job title of foreman, he picked out a 2-year-old Ford F-250, paid cash for it, and gave the keys to the new employee as a signing bonus. Then he gave me a wink and said something dismissive like, "You do the right things, you get treated the right way." That night, I returned to my room, got incredibly drunk, and marched right up to his room to resign. I even broke up with his daughter at that moment. I kind of forgot I was 200 miles from home, so in the middle of the night, I called my mom, and she drove over the mountain to retrieve me and my suitcase. When I came to the next day at my parents' house, I was mortified to realize I had quit in that fashion. Oops. Story 41. I worked at a digital marketing company for a few months. I revitalized the division, and things were progressing well. One day, I discovered that one of my subordinates had been harassed by my boss and the company owner, so I decided to quit. It was not sexual harassment. She was threatened with police involvement and various lawsuits for no reason. Being a young and talented woman, she was almost held at gunpoint. The boss had a criminal record for grand larceny in California. That was the last straw. Story 42. When it took 4 years to get from 30,000 to 38,000 after 3 promotions to manager, while still handling the tasks of my 2 previous roles, I asked to be raised to 40,000. They said they couldn't because my supervisor wasn't making that amount. What do you mean a supervisor isn't making 40,000 yet? I had to leave. Poverty was catching up. My next job increased my salary to 65,000 with less responsibility and workload. This was right before inflation during COVID-19, so I made it out just in time. Job hopping works because I doubled my salary the next year while still doing the same job with less responsibility. Story 43. I found the owner's nephew's pay stub on the copier. He was making significantly more than I was while I was training him. Story 44. The manager was abusive and started berating and insulting me, being very rude. I quit on the spot. Story 45. My manager was controlling and narcissistic. He punched a wall in the office when something minor went wrong, and no one addressed it, not even with a warning. I realized that day would be my last there. Story 46. My boss came to my house on a Saturday night to conduct my performance review. It was actually my parents' house, and he scared my dad, who pulled a gun on him. I had been using their house as my mailing address. I considered it a sign when I made a human resources complaint and was told I was wrong for using the incorrect address on my documents. He faced no consequences, and I left as quickly as I could. Story 47. Lack of professionalism is common among most companies here. They seem to want to get by instead of getting things done properly, and I hate it. Story 48. When I didn't receive a raise because I had used all 5 sick days given per year, the chief executive officer said that using all 5 sick days in a year indicated underperformance. It was a nonprofit organization, and I was their vocational evaluator. I easily generated $20,000 per month in assessments that I billed to the state. I left that place and found a new job with a significantly higher salary. Story 49. There is being ignored, and then there is someone dying because you were ignored. That is why I would never be a caregiver again. Story 50. My boss decided that seeing pigs at the fair was more important than my attending my child's send-off to their first year of college. Story 51. The place had no security cameras. I worked the graveyard shift and was held at gunpoint. I informed my boss in the morning, but nothing was done to improve security or safety at the workplace. I quit the following day. Story 52. I told my manager at Target that I would not tolerate disrespect from someone who just got out of jail for domestic violence. Story 53. I was a part-time stalker at Sherwin-Williams. I made it very clear to my manager that this was my part-time job for extra money. I had my full-time job where I paid my bills, and everything from Sherwin-Williams was just for hobbies. He was super cool and understood the situation. I showed up, stocked the shelves, took care of the warehouse, and helped customers with paint if needed. 14 hours a week, no problem, easy money. My manager got promoted to regional sales manager, and our store got a new manager, whom we'll call Jessica. Jessica came from a different store, and it was her first time managing. She was somewhat acceptable but also pretty annoying and tended to micromanage. Shortly after she joined, I moved apartments from 5 minutes away to about 45 minutes away to be closer to my full-time job. The upside to this was that I could stop by Sherwin-Williams on the way and get supplies if my store needed something. In my time there, I had some paint spill on my shoe. Nothing much, just a little white paint on the side of my black shoe. Jessica decided to change the dress policy one day I wasn't there, and really the only thing that changed was that we were required to have all black shoes. This was never communicated to the team other than by the people there that day who were informed. I showed up to work after stopping by a couple of stores on the way to pick up material. Jessica was late as usual, so I took care of the store with the assistant manager. She never mentioned the dress code change to me, so I had no idea that there had been any changes. While I was taking care of some customers, Jessica came up to me and interrupted my conversation just to berate me about having white paint on my shoes. Again, it was a drip of paint maybe 2 inches long at most on the side of my shoe. She yelled at me to go home and change my shoes. I was confused by this, and the customer was looking at me as if to say, "What is going on?" I asked Jessica if she was kidding because, once again, I had no idea there had been a dress code change. She told me to go home right now and change my shoes. I double-checked with her that she wanted me to drive 45 minutes home, change shoes, and drive 45 minutes back with a decently busy store that's short-staffed. She said, "Yes, leave now, goodbye." I headed home, and as I was sitting in traffic, I was stewing. I was annoyed and angry about this. It was a waste of my time. I called my dad to chat with him while I was waiting, and he was appalled by it. After about 15 minutes of driving and chatting, I made up my mind. I turned around and headed back to the store. I got there, went straight into the back, grabbed my speaker and charger from my cubby, went into the office, erased my name from the board, scribbled out my contact information on the sheet, and walked out. There was a huge line of people waiting to be helped, and Jessica was trying to assist one of them. I interrupted her conversation, told her, "It was nice working here. Goodbye," and walked out. Just as I was about to get into my truck, Jessica ran out and asked where I was going. I replied, "Home. You were disrespectful and I'm out," and drove off. The best part was that all of this happened about 8 years ago, and I only just received my last check about a month ago. Story 54. When a manager at my workplace bullied many of the staff, 3 of us were signed off by our doctors due to stress. My doctor advised me to write my resignation and submit it, stating that my leave due to stress covered their notice period. I asked a friend to hand-deliver it and felt great satisfaction knowing I would never have to return, and they were left in a difficult situation. Story 55. I worked at a smoothie shop owned by an unreasonable manager. One morning, after I had closed the night before, she wrote on the board that $20 was missing from the cash register and accused these 3 people, listing my name along with the girl who closed with me and another person who had worked earlier. She straight up accused us of being thieves for everyone to see. Later that day, she came in and said, "Good news, everyone. I found the $20 stuck to another bill in the bank bag, as if it was no big deal." I ended up quitting immediately that day with no notice. Story 56. I brought in a client, and my boss confronted me about the work I was doing for them. I told her that if she wanted to take over, she could do so, and then I walked out the door, taking the client with me. Story 57. I had 3 owners of the business who never agreed. If I did something one approved of, the other would be upset with me. It felt like trying to serve a 3-headed monster, and I became frozen in place, unable to take any action. Story 58. I worked as a custodian at the high school from which I graduated. I was responsible for maintaining the swimming locker room, and the students often behaved poorly throughout the year. One day, I discovered that someone had inserted pencils into the drains and broken them off. clogging the entire drainage system with debris. I wrote a note to my supervisor, went home, returned, and dropped off my uniforms in a garbage bag. I haven't gone back since. Story 59. When I was robbed, my boss refused to give my coworker and me time off to deal with the trauma. Instead, she stated, "It's not the company's problem. I've been robbed before all the time when I worked at a gas station. Get over it." Some people can be extremely unsympathetic. Story 60. He became very upset with me because I couldn't be on a support call with a client outside of my work hours. My young child has severe anxiety and difficulties getting to sleep, and I needed to be there for them. Story 61. I worked at Toys R Us for a year and was considering quitting because the store manager did not like that I requested time off for college. As a result, he intentionally fluctuated my hours, making me work fewer hours at the beginning of the semester and excessive hours at the end during finals, despite my requests for the opposite. The final straw was when he brought in the regional manager and falsely accused me of stealing. I asked for proof after he tried to bully me into confessing, and then I detailed his behavior before quitting on the spot. I then went home to study for finals, earned my associate degree, and transferred to a better university on several scholarships. Now Toys R Us is out of business, and I am working in an office while that former manager is working in the cafe at my job. Story 62. They wanted us to sell magazine subscriptions at the register. I knew this meant they were going under, so I decided it was a good time to end my 24-year career in retail. Several months later, the entire chain went bankrupt and was out of business permanently. Story 63. Target Canada Starbucks. I wasted 6 weeks trying to learn everything and help as much as I could. On the last day of training, I was brought into the office by the department manager and assistant manager. And for a good 10 minutes, they criticized all the flaws I had. Most of it had to do with my facial expressions, and then they told me I was horrible at customer service. I have a good case of resting face, and like many neurodivergent individuals, I can mask it unless I need to concentrate. As for the customer service aspect, the store wasn't open to the public, and the customer service was all role-playing. I had informed them during the hiring process that I struggle with role-playing. In any case, they made me feel like I was back in 9th grade, and I became a weepy, upset mess. When I clocked out, my husband took one look at me when he came to pick me up and said I wasn't going back, and we would make do. I blocked their numbers and never looked back. Story 64. It took longer than it should have. My trusting nature let me down. I was the 7th person to quit due to the owner's wife. She knew nothing about the business but made everyone miserable. I spoke to the business partner and explained my decision to leave and the reasons behind it. She asked me to wait while they attempted to establish some distance between her partner's wife and our staff. I tried, but it did not happen. 2 others have left since I did. Now I am in my 3rd year of the best job I have ever had, with great teammates, benefits, and opportunities. I am so happy. Story 65. A coworker was always unprofessional on the job. He stuck his head out of the window and shouted an inappropriate term at a police officer during a traffic stop. I reported the incident, but I was told that all that matters is getting the job done. Story 66. My boss made us stay until 8 p.m. every night. Not to work, just to keep her company. We weren't allowed to talk to one another, so we had to sit in silence and wait for her to be ready. My mom had been in a car accident earlier that year and almost didn't make it. Additionally, she was turning 60, so her birthday was a huge deal. I told my boss this, yet I still had to sit there in silence until 8 p.m. I missed my mom's birthday dinner. The next day, I quit. Story 67. After being passed over for promotion in favor of a manager's close friend after dedicating 9.5 years to the company, I decided to move on. I ended up having a rough night. On Monday, I submitted my 2 weeks notice and then had the easiest 2 weeks at that job. Story 68. It was Easter Sunday, and I was working at a bookstore. The place was very quiet since everyone expected it to be closed. I had finished my tasks, restocking candy and gift cards, tidying up the back area, and prepping books for pickup. Since it was slow, I started reading a book. This was the first time I had read anything on the clock, but there were literally no customers in the store and nothing to do. The manager came up and put the book back but didn't say anything. I picked it up again, and the manager returned, asking me to go into her office. She claimed a different manager, who disliked me, had said I was previously reading on the clock, which I insisted was not true. She said she would review the camera recordings, so I told her to do so. It would just be a waste of her time because it never happened. Regardless, she stated she was going to write me up for reading on the clock, which she described as tantamount to stealing from the company. I told her I had never been written up and was not going to start that day, and that I quit. I arrived at my parents' house just in time for Easter dinner being served. She claimed I would never be able to work for that bookstore chain again, which I found amusing because I was already employed elsewhere at a job that paid almost twice as much. It became even funnier when the bookstore chain permanently went out of business only a couple of years later. I still haven't been written up in any job to this day. I have never walked off another job without notice, but I have no regrets about that decision. Story 69. This may sound strange, but I realized I didn't want to be there, later discovering it was due to burnout. I was a college student working another job at the same time, and I didn't actually need it. Many things had happened beforehand, and I knew I would be handing in my notice at some point. I just wasn't sure when. I wrote up my notice when I got home and handed it in the next day. It seemed to really surprise my boss. I wasn't sure why, as I had expressed for months that they needed to replace the coworker who left because I couldn't manage the workload of two people in the same amount of time. Story 70. My site manager refused to call an ambulance when an elderly colleague was having a heart attack. They left him for 15 minutes before calling for help. Story 71. They fired most of my coworkers and expected me to do their jobs for the same pay. That was frustrating. They rehired one person for double his previous pay, but he quit soon after because it was too much work for one individual. Story 72. Not me, but my brother. He is a supply chain manager for a small healthcare company. He excels at his job and has worked his way up from the bottom. When the manager responsible for corporate travel left the company, my brother was asked to take on those duties. A few months later, the manager in charge of production sourcing, which was a corporate title for the person who buys all office furniture, supplies, and food, also quit, and my brother was asked to take on that work as well. He was doing the work of 3 managers without receiving any additional compensation. After 2 months, he told his boss that he needed to offload one of these positions or be compensated fairly. He was informed that they were still looking to fill the positions but should have someone hired soon. He requested a 10% raise and was told that there was no room in the budget at that time. He decided to find room in the budget and noticed several expensive charter flights taken by corporate executives. He drafted a proposal to save money using a different service and was told not to suggest anything that impacts the bosses again. He submitted his resume and received 4 different interview offers within 48 hours. He informed his boss that he would be taking 2 weeks off and used that time to interview, receiving job offers from every interview. On the day he returned, he informed his company of his highest offer, which included a 50% pay increase with no relocation required and only having to handle the responsibilities of one person. His company requested 24 hours to create a counteroffer. They returned with an offer of a 10% raise and promised that he would be able to offload one of his responsibilities to a new hire coming in a week. He refused the counteroffer and left at the end of the day for a better opportunity. Story 73. They hired several individuals with no experience who earned significantly more than I did for the same job I had been doing for years. I was making $13 while they started at $18, and my manager said the budget wouldn't allow for raises. Story 74. I received a written warning for sending a personal text on my personal phone during my personal time, expressing my dissatisfaction with our manager. Human Resources issued the warning on the 13th day of my 14-day notice period. They apparently have that much free time. Story 75. I was working inside a Home Depot advertising Parker and Son services for air conditioning, so I had to approach customers. I'm Italian, so I have an accent. A man started making racist remarks and mocking me with his child, asking, "Do you understand what she's saying?" I decided to leave and quit on the spot. Story 76. My boss screamed and cursed at me. I emailed him my resignation without a conversation. I believe he had treated many others the same way and gotten away with it. The entire culture was toxic. The screaming was the last straw after numerous other issues, including forcing overtime on my team while they were salaried, 12-hour days, and asking me to keep credit partners out of the loop on changes to terms. It all happened at once, and I was fortunate to never compromise my values. I walked away from a prestigious title and a significant raise. That was 12 years ago. I haven't earned that kind of money since then, but I am mostly happy and do not work for difficult people. Story 77. They were about to lay off 15,000 employees globally, but have since added another 22,000 to the list, expected in spring or summer 2025. Story 78. When the organization asked me if I wanted to be promoted to an administrative position at my then nonprofit healthcare job, I submitted my medical school application the following week and never looked back. Story 79. After an executive hired someone for a junior position and paid them more than me, even though I had been there for 4 years, was a manager, and worked hard, I decided to leave quietly as soon as possible. Story 80. I worked as a receptionist for a dermatologist and absolutely loved the job and the doctor, but that eventually turned into an office management position. When she decided to open more locations, she hired her sister to assist me. From day one, I received constant emails about what I was doing wrong, even though this had never been expressed to me by anyone else or the doctor during my years there. The communication was often passive-aggressive, and I experienced exclusion from coffee runs with the nurses. I tried to discuss the situation with the doctor, but she became defensive because, understandably, it was her sister. The final straw came when I received an email stating that she couldn't continue to do my job for me, and that if we needed to find someone who could do the job, she would. I effectively managed the responsibilities of 3 people in the office manager role with little compensation. From what I've heard, the situation at that office is a complete mess now. My motto is to treat good employees well. Story 81. The owner was terrible and would withhold paychecks if she did not feel like coming in. When I finally received my paycheck, at least 50% of them bounced. I would discover this while standing in the grocery checkout when my card would get declined. It was horrifying. This was during my 20s when I worked paycheck to paycheck. If they had been apologetic or if it happened rarely, it would have been one thing, but they acted as if it was normal. I worked there for 9 months, and at least 8 bi-weekly paychecks bounced. Story 82. My former boss asked me when I would be coming into work, expressing concern that I was letting the team down while I was hospitalized following a suicide attempt. I worked at a Starbucks. Story 83. When I realized my opinion on any topic would be overlooked, even if I am the biggest expert in the room. My old boss had the habit of thinking he is the one who knows best. I have 10 years of experience as a programmer, while the most he completed in programming was a 2 to 3 week boot camp. I thought he considered my opinion valuable, even if it was grading as equal to his. One day, I received an example that anything I said. When COVID-19 started to be less of an issue, we resumed going to the office once a month. Since I was on his way, we decided he would pick me up to save on fuel. On the way back, I noticed his GPS was not efficient and suggested, "Cut through this parking lot and you will be at my house." There is no way he knows more than I do. That is my neighborhood, and he lives half an hour further away. However, he brushed me off and chose to follow his GPS, which took us 2 signals further than necessary before turning around at my home. That is when I decided, I need to change jobs. Story 84. I was passed over for a promotion I rightfully deserved after working there for 10 years. I had been signed off years earlier for the promotion but declined due to focusing on college. I made it clear I wanted to be promoted now that I had graduated, delivering outstanding results at the top of my department and remaining in the field for the opportunity to advance while many others had left. Instead, I was passed over by someone who had been in the role for only 6 months. I was extremely upset and confronted my regional director, district manager, and direct manager. I expressed my frustration and highlighted that their combined incompetence was causing talent to leave. I submitted my 2 weeks notice to quit just before Christmas Eve and then called off the Saturday before Christmas as a final gesture of defiance against management. I didn't have a job lined up and took a month off to search. Eventually, I found a position that respects me and pays me twice as much with much less stress and a balanced schedule. I also received a managerial promotion a year into the job. Retail is not for me, and for anyone still stuck in it, remember that it won't last forever. There are better opportunities out there, but you need to make the effort to find them. Story 85. 3 stories, 3 times managers decided to fail. Story 1 asterisk I used to work at a bar as a dishwasher, and I worked doubles for 3 weeks straight. When we finally got another dishwasher, I was expected to train him. After working hard for 3 weeks of doubles, 5 days a week, I asked for a raise and was told I wasn't worth more than a 10-cent raise. 2 days passed, and I set up an interview for another job. I was hired fairly easily at $2 more than I made at the bar, so I told the old manager to leave me alone, and I was done. The other dishwasher quit 4 days later, and they tried to work him like they worked me during my 3 weeks of doubles. They were left without a dishwasher for 1 day before they called me back and offered me 50 cents more to return. I just laughed and told them to fail. If you want the other stories, let me know. Story 86. I was signed off for 2 weeks after a nervous breakdown. It was caused by various factors, but the bullying culture at my job was a significant part of it. The final straw was my boss calling me on the Monday of the second week, not to see how I was doing, but to tell me to come back because the rest of the team was struggling with my workload. The rest of the team had 4 clients each while I had 16. I didn't ask for 4 times the workload of everyone else, but when I requested some help, I was told no. When I asked for the clients to be shared out a bit, I was told no. I saw my colleagues leaving early with their work completed, while I was struggling under mountains of paperwork. We couldn't leave until our work was finished. Story 87. My boss, who was at least 20 years older than me and a man, yelled at me while I was sitting down. Story 88. 1. Being treated poorly by everyone except 2 or 3 coworkers. Being paid the same as an assistant daycare teacher while I was a lead. No overtime pay for the 12-hour shifts I worked. Having to come into work while running a fever and vomiting, while some of my coworkers could call off for minor illnesses. Almost everyone being on their phones during outdoor play, not just for a quick time check but the entire time. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.